deuxième vidéo.
Bonjour.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this roundtable, which is called Innovating in Turbulent Times. And you're going to get the view from local stakeholders. Here we're going to talk about the crisis and finding an answer to the crisis. I have with me a panel of experts from Nantes, but we also have somebody talking to us remotely, and together we're going to talk about the answer that Nantes has for the crisis. I think we're going to talk about two wonderful projects, the MakAir project, which Pierre Antoine Gourraud is going to talk about with Quentin. Thank you very much for being with us, gentlemen. And there's Nantes Entraide, another project which is going to be presented by our friend Céline Loup. So thank you as well for being with us. After the discussion of the two projects, we're going to have a panel discussion, an open discussion, where I'll talk about the panelists. I will introduce them to you. If you want to interact, here's what to do. There's a question, a survey. Do you think that this current health crisis is a hindrance to innovation? Yes, no, or perhaps? Let's begin. We've got many speakers, a great many subjects about which we have to debate. So I'd like to open the discussion with Pierre Antoine Gourraud et Quentin for the presentation of their project, the MakAir project. Over to you, gentlemen. Thank you very much. MakAir's story is not yet finished. We're going to talk about it. Quentin was at the genesis of this adventure. It's a ventilator. It's a medical respirator, a ventilator, which saw the light of day with the crisis. Is really uses 3D for its design, uses digital technologies, and it's only we're only able to do it through open source studies. At the beginning of the crisis then, let's see if this works. I'd like to see the next slide, please, says the gentleman. The challenge was very simple. At the beginning of the crisis, the health system in general was in a moment of uncertainty. There were a great many things missing. And amongst what was missing, you had these respirators, ventilators, machines which are supposed to take the place of the lungs of a patient to help them renew their air and get oxygen into the blood. And Quentin started a challenge. He said, you know, maybe we could build, using very simple material in France, elsewhere, maybe we could build a respirator which is able to be effective for the patients who are most severely impacted or feel the impact of this COVID-19 virus. Well, a few months later, here's the result. This is a world first, by the way, here in Nantes, with our friends at the local hospital. I'm working with the friends in Brest. And the first clinical trials were rolled out with the authorization with the National Agency for Biomedical Health and Safety. And amongst all the initiatives we've seen around the world, we're the only ones who've been able to actually test this on man with due respect for the patient, using scientific regulations, respecting all the scientific and safety protocols. And the recipe that we've put into place in Nantes, which is to support here and then to be rolled out further afield, well, we've done this through a collective of values. It's an industrial trial, but at human level, it's technical, but it's also within the remit of the health plan. And this was important given the current crisis. We're innovating in the health field, yes, but you can't just innovate any old way, obviously. Quentin is perhaps going to talk a bit more about this. This is one of the photos which shows you really how the project grew from mid-March onwards. I think you need to bear in mind at all times, you know, you've just heard Macron's speech saying that at this point anyway in March that we were at war. We're going to therefore fill in the blanks in wartime. We didn't have enough ventilators. So at that moment, the engineering team didn't really know how to create ventilators. So we worked on many models at the same time. We used internet, obviously. And we had university, we had an academic construction. And then we did this with academics, and then we wanted to add medical knowledge to that. We went to see developers. But when you build on an organization that's going to go from 5 people up to 300 people in the course of 2 weeks, you can't think about organization just in engineering terms. You have to build all of the functions of the structure at the same time. And by that, I mean what? I mean logistics, accounting, the capacity to go and find money, to get financing. We got financing from the Innovation Agency, from the CEEA, the University of Nantes, a certain number of private companies who wanted to help contribute to this. And this means what? It means you have to have a department specifically dedicated to that. You have to be able to communicate with different players, people who know how to talk to institutions, etc. And that's what you're going to build upon. The project is never simple. You have to think about it across the board, cover all the aspects, and you have to set values. We set the values collectively. It had to be open source. Everything that we did was going to be available to all as quickly as possible. Why? Because, well, obviously we had to produce something very quickly, and when it had to be benevolent. So on the 17th of March, we initiated the project. The 3rd of April, we started our tests on animals. The 9th of April, we launched the first clinical trial investigation at the with the regulatory body, and the first clinical trial took place at the end of July. It might seem long, but it's very, very quick in this field. This is an approach which is tried out on a real human at the end of 3 months is very, very quickly. This is something that needs to be, when you're dealing with these short timeframes, you have to push people out of their comfort zone. When you talk about it like that, what we can say is that the crisis is an opportunity to go beyond borders. We talked about open design, open hardware. This design allowed us to go beyond 5 people at the beginning to over 350 people working on the project who all contributed in their own way, within their appropriate field, with their expertise. A central value to all this is being entrepreneurial, not being afraid of failing, not being afraid of making mistakes, looking at all different design concepts. And something that really stuck out and marked me, you showed some pictures at the beginning there, was the following. What was constant throughout the project was this idea of being fearless, if you like. Everybody was working out with the comfort zone. When you were working with someone who might be slightly intimidating in normal circumstances, suddenly wasn't, because we were all working together. And this was central to the project from the get-go. Excellent response from the academic world. They were very happy with it. We had a hospital who was going to promote the clinical trial, machine that was put together by people working freely together. The CEA, the University of Nantes, etc., all working together, giving us their means, letting us use their means. And very quickly, the Innovation Agency said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to finance your project. That helped us, all working with learned society, working with the medical society in France, one specifically used to dealing with catastrophes. And all of this meant that the public and private stakeholders were working together to get this project up and running. So it was human, industrial, it was technical. All of that went into building the machine. And perhaps Quentin will tell you about the constraints that he would normally work with, how he dealt with them in this case. Well, yes, the base idea was, of course, there are going to be constraints. What were they? Well, we didn't want to just produce one machine. What we wanted to do was produce many machines. So if you find a solution which cannot be rolled out elsewhere, then it's no longer of any interest. So from the start of the project, we said we have to look at storage, stock, how much could we produce? Because even when you have a good solution, if the solution can't be rolled out very quickly in time and in place, there's no point. We had to have something that was easily duplicated. So we had R&D, the industrial process and the certification working together. We had R&D suggesting solutions, talking about the possibility of industrialization. That was in a constant loop, and so we know fairly quickly if it's not possible. And then certification, had very binary constraints in design, so that we didn't ask questions later on if it was going to take too long, for example. When it came, you can't have glue, for example. That was one of the things where one of the design concepts that was discovered from the get-go was we couldn't have any glue involved in the machine. Now, when you talk about medical certification of this process, you have to talk about an industrial process. So that means that the initial plan, which was in place, where you're going to explain how you produce respirators, and everybody goes into the garage to try and create a respirator to then plug in Granny. That's not how it works, don't worry. What you're going to have to do is produce something which is going to free up the whole project for R&D. And then what we're going to reference is the way in which we produce the respirator and the industrial process that goes with it. Now, that means what? That means we're going to have to bring to R&D components which are important for certification, because we have to be capable of repeating in a sure and certain way, rolling this process out over and over again. So all notions of calibration, etc., had to be pushed out of the way in order to avoid complexities in manufacturing. And I think that's extremely important to say. What you have to see that French industry, when you ask for this kind of thing, it's there. We talk about French industry often as being something that's a bit has been a failure. We're no longer any good at it. That's not true. That's not true. Our experience has shown that French industry is reactive, capable, able to react very quickly. It's the social fabric for many large companies like Renault and all the service providers of the second range, third range issues. These are the people who reacted intelligently, very quickly to help us, and they show you that you mustn't think that French industry is something from the past. We've got some of the best industrial services in the world here. Now, these are companies who got together in the health field to help in the industrialization process. And in the format, it's almost like when you take your oath, the Hippocrates oath, you say you don't want to harm anyone. So you're working in health, but also in research for health. What does it mean? It means that the safety of the patient and the safety of the medical workers has to be paramount. And that was the guiding light, if you like, for all our series of information. And I think you're going to see some photos of the validation process that we put in place. This is at the hospital in Nantes, in Grenoble as well, and Brest. These are all the photos which show what we're doing. We're using models, actually, for this test. It's a simulation. So we're innovating, and you can innovate a lot quicker because you're in a crisis, but you have to validate all of the innovative processes. You can't take a shortcut. So this meant that we had to succeed. We had to succeed within regulation, and it's a world first here in France. We're helping people breathe through this machine that we had we'd drawn up just a couple of months beforehand. And what's important to know is that each person involved in the project really got involved. Nobody said, oh, I'm working at 70, 60%. People were 100% involved in this team. They worked day and night. We timed how much sleep we were having. And we were constantly thinking about when the material was going to be delivered. People who worked far away from the industrial site were constantly phoning, emailing, keeping in touch. Everybody made a great deal of effort. When you come to the CEA in Grenoble, we had lockdown, if you like, in the team, in the R&D team. It was very complicated, when it said to say we're going to respect barrier gestures, etc. We're going to respect distances, etc. No. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take the design team. We're going to have them locked down in one building, and that way there's no more contact with the outside world. Initially, of course, we thought that was going to last a few days. People were there for 5 weeks. But once you were locked down in the building, we had all the material. The CE opened the doors and indeed the budget to us. So we were able to look at the globality and use the totality of the lab. We could take the lab apart. We did this in CEA. It took about 14 hours to take it apart. And that's probably the longest night that we spent. We had to go from here to Grenoble. We had to get there to the lab and put the lab together again in Grenoble. So a great deal of work, a great deal of generosity from the CER. And it shows you the academic spirit, making sure people ensured that we had everything we needed. We published. You can see the people I'd like to thank. They're already on the board. And there's going to be expertise coming out regarding the quality of the work. And we're publishing the results of the clinical trials. And this, again, lends a great deal of transparency to the open source movement. We've got the CHU, the Sabra group, all of these are being promoted, the CER, people that have helped us, who have supported us through all of the project, the preclinical trials, and then the first pre-industrial series. There's a technical challenge. Perhaps you could talk to us, Quentin, about this new transition, this new machine that we're going to be able to create with MakAir and the role of 3D printing in this. What's important is that many machines are built using materials. It's physical, it's electronics, it's mechanics. Now the MakAir, this is software. And then, of course, we furnished it with material. Now, why is this important to know? Well, it means quite simply that you can be a little bit late in terms of your physical design and conception, and the material will pick up the slack. The software acts as the intelligence of the machine, and this is a digital transition of a medical approach. And that's extremely important to understand. Because when we talk about digital eating up the planet or software eating up the planet, it's not just about showing some photos on Instagram. What we're trying to do is show how we can put intelligence into any object in order to optimize it, to reduce the economic and ecological costs, and make it able to update itself thanks to a simple update, a technological update, and an IT update. And from that, we can reduce design times using 3D printing. And it's wonderful for prototypes. Thanks to the crisis, because of the crisis, we are constrained to be frugal in our research using limited material, and we've produced a high-tech machine produced at low cost. Thank you very much, Pierre Antoine and Quentin, for this wonderful presentation of MakAir and its response to the health crisis. It was a fast, rapid technological response, and now we're going to move to another type of project looking at a different theme linked to health, but more to lockdown as a result of the health crisis. And we're going to talk about how Nantes managed to organize itself in a time of lockdown. Talk about Nantes Entraide. This is your project. Hello, everybody. Our project is very, very different, actually. Nantes Entraide, what is it? Well, it's a network where citizens can help each other. At the beginning of lockdown, I should say after 24 hours, we had associations talking about the needs they had. They needed help from volunteers when it came to food distribution. Beside that, we had quite a lot of citizens who wanted to help, and they didn't know what to do. So they called the town hall to say, look, I'm available to help. I'm in lockdown. What can I do to help? With all of that, we said, well, I think there's really something we can do here. We have to centralize business, bearing in mind that the city of Nantes does not have a platform like some other communities. So we had to say, we have to organize a network differently then, don't we? We have to recontact all local people who want to help to see where they could be of use. We didn't really want to talk about the technical skills, but what they could do to help. Yes, but let's just be clear. It's not just technical skills. Neither was it the case for us. It was a major project. There were people who actually came in just to cook for us. So everybody's competences were put to measure. And I think that really is the strength of Nantes Entraide, which means mutual aid. It considered the willingness of each and every citizen. You could have a woman who just wanted to bake biscuits and cakes to help us, to someone who wanted to take the time to go and visit people in old folks' homes, go to food banks, etc., etc. So everybody's skills were included, and we put together a small team, as you can see from this photo. This is a few members of the group. These are people who work for the city of Nantes. They got together to try to have a single point of call for the town hall, who would group together all the different calls, all the different offers. And our job then, subsequently, was to create the network with, of course, our friends from the CCS, our colleagues, and all of the people, stakeholders in local associations. The result then, well, we had a great many subjects to cover. We had more than 2,000 requests. We had people generously giving to food banks, giving material, making clothes, all to be put to the service of those who needed it. Oh, there was, of course, the concern of having enough masks. You saw a seamstress there making masks freely on her own time. I think I've got a picture here of us. These are more pictures on the mask making. But we did support an associative approach. It's called the 15,000 masks for the neighborhoods. And this was an approach which was triggered by a group of women. And they were all seamstresses. And they wanted to get together to produce masks, so that at the end of lockdown, we could give masks to everybody in Nantes, people who weren't able to afford them at the end of the first lockdown. And our role then was to try and ease their task, ease their life. And in the previous photos, you saw my colleagues unraveling all the elastic. There you are. We tried to go and buy elastic for the masks, and it was really very topical. And we bought material, recovered material from those willing to donate it, and to bring it to the seamstresses so that they could then make the masks. There were a great deal of elastic then, yes. So we had a few hours fun there trying to unravel that whole ball of elastic. Now, we really focused on food distribution. At the beginning of the crisis, at the beginning of lockdown, we noticed that there was a real impact on families. There was no more canteen. People found themselves in a great deal of difficulty. You no longer had the possibility of having a small job on the side, which allowed you to have a complement in terms of your salary. So neighborhood associations got in touch with the city in order to establish solutions or ways of seeking solutions together, solutions to this very evident problem. And here you have a photo of a food bank distribution in Bellevue, which is in an area which was very much supported by the city in terms of logistics, etc. And now, and perhaps my colleague will talk about it, this has become the alternative market in Bellevue, if you like. And this was a small citizen movement responding to a crisis, and from that, we have become quite a large project. And none of this would have been possible without people, delivery people, who worked freely for us. These were our colleagues working for the city who ensured the logistic platform, but we had also the support of many local citizens who helped over the course of the months to help us distribute parcels to people's houses. Why to houses? Well, because people were in lockdown. And sometimes there were concerns regarding mobility, people with health concerns. So we endeavored to find tailor-made solutions for these people.
During the first week, at the beginning of April, 65 families were delivered meals, then 400 food parcels. So this is not typically what we do, delivering around food parcels, but obviously we had to be agile, we had to adjust to the circumstances. We started working with specialized organizations, NGOs such as the Red Cross, and so we had to, respond to the emergency. This is a very nice project, and thank you for presenting it. And you've created a non-lucrative offer, supply and demand platform that can only grow. So that's great. I would like to introduce the panelists that will be with us for the coming hour. Raphaël Suire, your economics and innovation management professor at the University of Nantes. Thank you for being here. Mahel Coppey, you are the vice president of Nantes Métropole in charge of waste management and solidarity-based economy. Francky Trichet, vice president of Nantes Métropole for innovation, digital and international relations. Also with us, Laurent Devismes. You are an urbanism professor at the School of Architecture of Nantes, and via video link we have with us Mr. Giovanni Allegretti. Can you hear us, sir? Can you hear us?
Okay, magnifique. Giovanni qui va.
Great. So Giovanni will be speaking English. He is an architect, an urban planner at the University of Coimbra in Portugal. So let's get the ball rolling with you, Laurent. You've been studying the local ecosystem here in Nantes, the innovative areas here in Nantes. Are you surprised with these two projects, MakAir and Nantes Entraide, on the other hand? Or is it something that is really in line with the innovative culture in Nantes? Well, I think this will be the main focus of this hour of discussion, but I think we should not assume that there is such a thing as a local ecosystem that creates values or that, permeates certain innovative practices. For MakAir, it was true. For that project, it was true. But I'm not so sure that there's such a thing as an innovation ecosystem here in Nantes. But it is nonetheless interesting to take a look at the history of that innovation process, especially in the public realm. Before COVID, over the last 30 years, I don't have the time to go into the details, but for a long time, innovation was just modernization. Practically, it meant technical modernization of processes. At the end of the 1990s, there's something that quite important that emerged is local actions and the creation, for instance, in Nantes of neighborhood teams, which brought about the rise of initiatives which we've just talked about. So, and it's a challenge that still exists today to fight the silos and the fragmentation of public policy. And within Nantes Métropole, for instance, you see that there is a division for mobility and traveling, another one for roads, and another one for soft mobility. So will there be something more cross-cutting in the future? So no one can tell at this point. Another trend that is interesting, I believe, is that the forms of innovation of public policy and policy making have really been multiplied over the last few years. Sometimes it's via a body with delegated powers from the public authorities. You have neighborhood councils, major debates, citizen prospection, many different programs. So it's good that there are many different things, but it's quite confusing at the same time. And when you want to include people in the design of public policies, you need to really take into account the opinions and interests of everyone involved. So clearly, the current period is a boost, is a catalyst for all that. Also, over the last few years, we have seen a greater focus being put on technologies and digital technologies. And a few years ago, the innovation meant the connected city, a connected street, for instance, and not necessarily the innovation that you can bring to home appliances, for instance. It was all about 3D printing, 3D houses, for instance. So and so it was sort of a French tech approach, but the meaning of innovation is really different now. It's not about technologies. It's more about the daily life. So in Nantes here, we have entrepreneur-led products, environmental project, and depending on the cases at hand, the focus shifts. But we've seen recently that on-the-ground professionals have really taken the lead in a number of projects. And there clearly is, a change in the way public policy is designed and implemented, and organizations of inhabitants, which used to be defiant or reluctant in the face of public policy, and now there is more of a collaboration spirit, if you will, going on. So, Mahel, what is your take on the changes that occurred in the way that we implement and design public policies, the fact that it is now more open? Thank you, Laurent, for this introduction, because Nantes is a beautiful city for innovation, and we are singled out for that. But I think there are many rebels here in Nantes. This is a rebel city. In terms of social innovation, we have a true pool of talents, men and women, who set about changing things. And this goes back a long time in our history. We have a tremendous trade union history, working class history, working class struggles, farmer struggle also, and we have again this pool of talent who are able to provide down-to-earth solutions to the problems of the day, and they want to really involve those who are most concerned and most affected by the problems of the day. So as early as 2001, the city of Nantes has wanted to address the question of the solidarity-based economies. It is really important to be very close to the ground. So back then in 2001, we had to come up with a definition for ESS, solidarity-based economy. We had to brainstorm what social innovation was and how we could actually organize something from the ground up on that topic. And in 2014, we opened up a venue, a sort of a cluster called the Solilab, which now has 400 members, all pertaining to the field of social and solidarity-based economy. So this is also something that has materialized in the daily lives of our inhabitants. There are about 200 projects each year which come out of the cluster, which I just mentioned, and this is a way to inject democracy into the economy. And we cultivate, we nurture this desire for social innovation, because this is, innovation breeds innovation, and this is a great way to do away with silos. I think the city of Nantes is very much eager to inject dialogue where it is least expected. For instance, we have consultation, public consultations, public debates. For instance, we spent 1 year with all those affected thinking about and talking about how we can go about addressing the question of old age or the question of energy transition. And the first major consultation of that kind is what relationship do we want with the Loire river that flows through Nantes. So we were also keen on combining the environmental questions with the economy and with entrepreneurial projects. Very operational projects, environmentally friendly business projects. And this is also about placemaking. We have launched a COVID-19 citizen convention. This is going to be a 100-day process. We will have contributions from experts, so experts about local health situations, experts also on the local economic situation and inequality situation, and we obviously will be also taking in the contributions of local inhabitants about this. We really want, we know that there are no, one single solution, so we want plural solutions and as diverse and as adapted as possible. So you're saying that public authorities have a role in fostering innovation and in making the different stakeholders meet one another and work with each other. Raphaël, let me turn to you now. What do you think about that community, that innovative community? What do you think about this MakAir project? Well, this MakAir project is great. I mean, there's one thing that we've learned from it is that it's very difficult. Very difficult to think that in the same health conditions and on the same territory, we could have done the same thing. I mean, it's like with the Silicon Valley. Everyone went there to visit it and to study it, but there's only one Silicon Valley in the end. So I think we can all be innovative. I mean, when we're, children, most of us at some point were faced with, an object. Okay, it works, and let's okay, it works, and I'm not going to ask more questions. But others think, let's take it apart and let's put it back together. So let's retro-engineer it. So it's not really useful, but you learn in the process. And others think, well, could I use it for something else? Not something very useful, but it's fun. So you take a wheel out, you take it apart, or you give it new properties. But basically, you start to your own DIY. And for instance, a puppet with 3 legs, that's nice. That's scary for my parents, but that's useless. But that's fun. So this idea of trying things with no real skills, but trying something original. And the thing is, as you go on, you go to school, you go to university, and things become more rigid and more normative, and you don't question it. But a lot of us still, have this spirit of poacher, if you will, or pirate. In the 1990s, at MIT, Niels Gerenstein decided to create a new course, about how to do, just about anything with anything. So he made available a Fab Lab, 3D printers, and said, well, we can imagine a lot with this. So he said, I don't really know what this could be for, but it could be for a lot of things. So this Fab Lab movement, which originated at MIT, created this atmosphere of this philosophy of, I'm trying to address a problem. I don't really know what the problem is, but that will probably lead somewhere. For instance, when I was in a Fab Lab, I built an elevator for bunnies. So you think, okay, do bunnies need an elevator? No, but maybe, others will do it, but do it differently throughout the world, And we may all have one piece of the solution that could make for a better bunny elevator. So the idea underlying Fab Labs is that innovation can be very decentralized, can be really because usually this is a top-down approach, and Fab Labs are ascending. They're open, and great ideas are in the minds of everyone. So not necessarily the minds of engineers. So maybe the best bunny elevator will be designed by someone who's not an engineer, because you have to, it has to do with how connected you are to your inner child, I would say. So. Here in Nantes, there's a very vibrant Fab Lab movement. So this is a phenomenon that has really settled in. Often it's difficult to scale it up, because the major difficulties with such innovations is you are going to upend certain markets, and you are going to offer products that can be manufactured for cheap, and you are going to be seen as an unfair competitor. And so there are two types of innovations or innovators who are going to be opposed, or there will be regulatory constraints, because basically you're an outsider just challenging a system that that works according to certain norms and standards and codes. But what is fascinating is that with great courage, and they managed to, overcome all obstacles. And at the end, I think this is going to work. And maybe major industrial players in the end will say, we don't really understand what you do, but you seem to be brilliant. Let's work together. But the question of illegitimacy is very present. Who are you? I mean, I was paid to do what I do, but you just did it, for fun. So what's your legitimacy? So clearly, innovation is not. I can see it on Slido here. 71% of respondents say that the crisis is not a roadblock to or stumbling block for innovation. So, Francky Trichet, do we need bunny elevators? Yes, especially when, I didn't know that anecdote, but I really enjoyed that. Nantes is fortunate to be both large and small. When I say that, we don't necessarily have an ecosystem. I tend to talk about the family of innovators. We all know one another. We don't necessarily all like one another, but we like to spend, the end-of-year festivities together. But we know one another, and we have a network effect that works really well. And suffice to say, you just have to hear what our neighbors say about us and other regions say about us, that everything goes very quickly here in Nantes. So we're small in that way. And this is a great advantage compared to other territories, other communities which are larger and therefore less reactive. And the MakAir project clearly shows that. And all the echelons have to be involved. There's this idea that of placemaking with the inhabitants. There are also projects where science provides meaning to innovations. And some people, like Antoine, for instance, are not, from here, but now they work here. And that's great that he decided to join us. And if we didn't have the rebels, as Mahel said, and those who are engaged and enraged, because to do what they did, I mean, it's just crazy. If you don't have these personalities, it just doesn't work. So we have, advanced science laboratories who work for the very long term and have been working for the very long term for a long time now. And sometimes it requires breaking certain things, breaking certain codes, as Quentin did. I remember him calling me on a Sunday night, and he told me, I really want to meet someone who works for the hospital here in Nantes because I have a project to pitch to them. And this is what they did in a very, constrained and very regulated area such as hospitals and health. So I'm very happy that it happened in Nantes. So I enjoy what Mahel said about 360 degrees. We understand, I think, in Nantes that the gap between the various strands of innovation, this is where you create wealth and new projects. A few years ago in Nantes, there was a political decision to ensure that local inhabitants would be more involved, would have more of a say in the design of public policies. And I think we shouldn't oppose technological innovation and social innovation. No, technological innovations are at the service, they work for all other forms of innovation, social innovation and others. So clearly there is this gap or interstice between different strands of innovation, and this, another word for it, is interdisciplinarity. We shouldn't think that there are no disciplines anymore. No, we need disciplinary excellence, but it's in the meeting points between the different disciplines that lies the true wealth of innovation. So, but you can't just say it, and you can't just, say that it will happen. So you need to create the proper frameworks for the different disciplines to meet and produce something together. And, I will always fight the silos and the fragmentation. In Nantes, we never wanted our smart city projects to be all about, technologies. We don't even have one technology-led project. One that could be interesting is, for instance, public lighting, connected public lighting. But we don't have such a project. I hope we'll have it. But it's really the only city, as I see it, where we fight the idea of technology for the sake of technology. So we're small. We have deeply committed and rebel innovators. And we truly believe that we can make this place, this city, with the inhabitants. Because if anything is lacking, if you don't have the science, if you don't have the local participation, you will get nowhere. Because at some point you have to go through the steps. And I think in Nantes we have all the elements, all the bricks to do well. And so this is why I think we were awarded the Innovation Capital Prize. And I would like to have the European perspective So Giovanni, what do you make of these two different projects? Do you believe that this is the example of a new cooperation model that you can see in other European territories as well?
For this dialogue, because I learned a lot, and I was very interested in listening the two stories from Nantes because I find them very paradigmatic. Also listening to the colleagues speaking about the Fab Lab, if you watch what happened in the network of Fab Lab, you see that there are mainly three areas which are very interesting. Of production, social production during COVID, the fabrication of respirators, mobile ventilators, masks, medical shields, a second line of action that was the demand offer of services and solidarity action. And there is a third hybrid area very important, which is the just-in-time production with the 3D printers of mechanical pieces that were rare to find in the market. So somehow, one of the first important issues of social innovation in this period was the capacity to face a context in which time programming capacity disappeared because of some emergencies that determined different priorities also in production and in transportation of definitely, if we look to the social innovation definition, so reconfigure existing social practice, then answering to big societal challenges, enhancing well-being, and the fourth component, having the social fabric not just among the beneficiaries of the initiative, but part of the promotion and protagonist. COVID pandemic can be seen as a unique opportunity for the emergency of the indispensable role of civil society. And what has been debated here until now shows also the importance of the connection between the public authorities and the social worlds. For different dynamics. For example, giving a stage. I'm thinking about what the Association of Participatory Local Authorities did in Portugal in these months with creating an award for bottom-up practice among young, imagined by young people. So the two winners were both in Algarve region and were imagined both by students of medicine, and where on the one side the project COVID Algarve was similar to one of the projects that we heard about Nantes, and the second one was fighting disinformation through a website called Clinic with Q.pt, where students of medicine were helping people to understand many things that were confused in the public debate and is mainly in the social network. So this role of giving the stage was very important. The second thing that was very important was coordinating initiatives by part of municipalities. There are many examples. For example, in Bologna, in Italy, there have been a strong role of the municipal government in coordinating more than 400 groups that are called agreements of pact of care of the commons that change many of their priorities and try to adapt to the COVID emergency. And I think this role of connection and help a lot this project to optimize their and maximize their results. But on the other side, there is another thing that we have to say, that not always participation in terms of, for example, co-decision or co-organization was maximized in this period. I think that from this perspective, there was a little bit a missed opportunity for public institutions in this COVID period in enhancing the participatory projects. and processes. Co-production was very important, but co-decision appeared to be less. The majority of participatory processes, formalized one in municipalities, metropolitan area and region, blocked for many months, and they are still blocked by fear of social big numbers, and some continued on the platforms. But I think that there could be now a rethinking of the needs of strategic participation, because we have observed a lot of solidarity engagement, ludic and playful engagement. Now the singing, the film projected on building, but I think we need a strategic participation now to rethink the future. I'm thinking about, for example, the house that become an office. No, there have been some interesting group in Galicia working with families in order to help them to reorganize the house in order to allow telework and teleschooling for the children. And I think that the debate on houses for the future has to be put
Merci Giovanni, parce qu'on désolé de vous interrompre, mais parce qu'on va devoir continuer, mais on a.
I'm very sorry, Giovanni, for cutting you off at this point, but we see that there are many different projects which try to provide an answer to this crisis. We've heard some examples here in Nantes, technological examples, cultural examples.
I'd like to move now towards two different subjects. Two main subjects. We talked about being rooted in this area, this territory, as we like to say in France, in a crisis. What I'd like to try and understand better is this sense of urgency, the sense of speed that is inherent in the solutions that we're producing for a market which is not adapted, and now there are other solutions. So we have to go very quickly, but we also have to take the necessary time to make sure that we are putting safe products out onto the market. Now, I think there's a very easy way to answer that. Often, innovation is seen as something that's seen as being very solitary. People work alone, but it's not. It's a connective way of working. Innovation is usually born of a meeting between one person or one skill set and another. And that's why it's important to go back to what Pierre Antoine said. The xenophobia was not having any kind of well, what I said was the lack of this fear of someone who's different from me. And that's absolutely fundamental in any innovative project, obviously, to have this idea that I'm not afraid anymore. I'm not afraid of someone who's different from me or anything like that. Not at all, because we need everything, don't we? We need to be open to everything. And that is what really creates innovation. It's a driver. Here you have a meeting point of many different skill sets. And it's very interesting to see that in light of the MakAir project, because the culture there was a culture which was derived from the digital world in open source. Open source is a model which, everybody looked at saying, what is this world? Today, we don't have the same vision. Most softwares in the world today are open source. This is the model which has, just defied all the odds and which has put an end to individual software holds. So this is the makers' culture. And this is linked to a kind of clan making. When you have makers for life, if I said that, I was going to shoot myself in the foot, because when you get to industry maker, what does that mean? It means it's like a Sunday DIY guy. You get to medicine, you sort of pull together a machine, you get to the medical world, people say, oh, they're the clowns that just did DIY on a Sunday. It's not true. So we have to be careful not to get stuck into a fab lab and not be able to get out and have your project realized by industry. And the force of MakAir is exactly the opposite of that. We were able to take this maker's culture to include people from the industrial world who accepted our way of working. I mean, they came to the table sometimes with the absolute rigor of their field, and they had to accept our way of working. They had to put their phobias aside. And I think this is inherent in any serious comprehension of what we do. Sometimes you have people who, by default, don't really have anything to say to each other. But the crisis was a catalyst for conversation, for mingling, and the importance and the, the high tension, the high pressure nature of the crisis meant, I suppose we were working like in a nuclear reactor. It forced people to come together to work at a crossroads of skill sets, and made people offer the very best of themselves. And that is why the crisis is a catalyst, I would say. In this way, people were forced together and innovation was born of it. So normally these are people who came together, people that would never necessarily have met, and the crisis encouraged this. You're talking about meeting, but one of the symbols of the crisis was isolation, wasn't it? It was confinement, it was lockdown, people being alone. Makers for Life, wait a minute. Most of the people involved in the project I did not know, and I met them just a few weeks ago. However, I feel like I've known them for the last 15 years. So it shows you this works. We've had web conferences, we've had video meetings. Well, of course, the whole climate is changing, all the cooperation models are changing. Yes, I wanted to add something, if I may. When it comes to social innovation, what can I say? This crisis sped up the way in which we work and have been working for the last few years. Let me give you an example. Food waste. In the city in 2009, decided it was going to reduce food waste. It was a very important project, etc. Now, realistically, we all work within a certain framework, and it's very difficult to think and work outside the box. But COVID-19 in March made us all aware that there were people who are hungry, and yet we have all this enormous amount of food waste. So this is the crossroads, and I will use the word crossroads because I want to talk about, in French, the word is Carrefour, and she's talking about the supermarket Carrefour. So you have your very classic traditional companies, you have more solidary, supportive industries. People were forced to consider this position, the topic. We have projects everywhere to help reduce food waste, and this crossroads of acceleration allowed us to put a project in place very quickly to make sure that no one went hungry. A concern for me was, how can we make sure that this is durable? How can we make sure that this goes the distance? This is not a one-shot project. How can we make sure that this becomes a collective contract, so that this speed which we've adopted to implement the project becomes a sustainable speed where we can help deliver food to anybody, young people, old people, students who are suffering from hunger. How can we make out of How can we make out of this possible? Well, it is possible, and this was carried out in record time. Crisis oblige. We shook the coconut tree, we shook the tree to make sure that we were all awake, that we were able to really face and rise to the challenge of this crisis. I want to come back on what Quentin said. I think it's primordial. It's very important to try and understand breakthroughs and the mixture of contrary meanings. What do I mean by that? Well, you have governance. You have governance at the regional level, at European level, or at country level, where we're looking perhaps for aid, etc. But, MakAir is a great example. At no point in time is a machine powerful in and of itself. It's all about human energy. It's all about the human spirit behind the creation of this machine, accepting to make mistakes, accepting the idea of making mistakes in order to progress. There's no certainty. The mistakes have to be accepted, have to be normal before we can come up with the solutions. So the question is, how can we design public policy which are not just going to subsidize the existent, but they're going to help subsidize helping people change their mindset or create new connections. It's very complex to do that. It's very difficult because the people that decide aren't people who manage that kind of field. These are people who look at standards and regulation. So how do you do that? How do you inject that into public policy? In Nantes, you've got people who are used to working like with City Lab, etc., where you're trying out there in the field to twist things to suit. You don't know if it's going to work, but you have to take the chance. And what does this do? Well, it injects a bit of mobility into what people are doing, and it makes the stakeholders move forward quickly, perhaps in a different way from which they would normally work. It makes people meet that would never have met. You've heard it from Quentin and from others around this table. People get together, people who would never have worked together normally. Now, the first question that we have from the public is, how can we implement this kind of project in normal times without waiting for a further crisis to force us to do so? Because again, that's interesting. We're talking about a revolution. This crisis has effectively allowed us to create a kind of revolution. Perhaps you could answer that, Laurent? Yes, I'd love to. Perhaps it will bring us to another conception of what the territory is. When we talk about the territory, what are we doing? We're talking about an area, a corral, which is subject to sovereignty, subject to, subventions, subsidies, and everything else. We have to look at the networks which govern this territory, this area now, this city. The risk of the conception that we have is you have a club effect. Now, what I find interesting in what's been said is that there's been a real discovery of one by another. People who didn't know each other were forced to work together, and they've shattered this traditional understanding of the club with the creative people on one side, the industrialists or the producers on the other. That's the first point. And the second point, since we're talking about, the territory, I think we're struck to see the level of public action at local level. Who's the mover? Well, it's the town hall. So perhaps there's a real challenge here. How can we make that trickle down to metropolis level? I think there's an important element here. We have to be able to meet others in due respect and due commitment. For me, there's only one solution, is to look at the social and territorial gridding. We have to make sure that we have areas which help encourage links and meeting. It's not easy. Now, we could think of Ecosoli, we could think about the canteen, areas which already have a soul. Souls have to be created. We can't start from the beginning and saying, here's this wonderful area, but there's no soul, there's no initial sense, there's no intelligence behind it for one particular grouping of people. But when you reduce the number of places that people can meet, the easier it is, I suppose, for people to meet and create these links. And I think this ability to create links is what's important. If you have all these extra large meeting places, I'm not sure that that really is favorable to this kind of encounter. I don't think Station F is possibly what they wanted in Paris at the beginning. The concentration level that they have there is perhaps not which was envisaged. Maybe we'd be better to have several areas, several venues where people can come together and talk about different subjects. Yeah, there are bridges between one space and another. And I think the role of the local authority is to encourage this, to render these spaces available. We look for Take for Good, for example, where we try to encourage debate, and we try to encourage the rhythm of innovation. We want to move the guidelines, move the lines, think outside the box, and then crank it up a level. It's always difficult to get to that last area where we move to a scale model from our experimentations, etc. That passage is always difficult. For example, with waste, you've got some wonderful innovations in waste management. But if you don't get all the major players in that sector working together, we're not going to manage to scale up and move to an industrial model. You have to get people working together. You have to make sure that they create a model which is going to work. Now, this, again, is difficult because it's difficult experimenting upstream where you have very nice things, very beautiful things, but you can see there are different kinds of scales, whether it's the city, the metropolis, the region, or Europe. You have to have public support and public orders. That's kind of the bait. You see green hydrogen, which is pushing us forward. Now, if the public order is not there to tease, to fuel the pump, then the industrial players are going to say, well, we can't reduce our costs, we can't do this. Today, we need the public to help us ensure that these innovations, these inventions which are available, are pushed through to an industrial scale. So they have to be aware of it through these meeting places. This works. We have to be there. The public has to be there in order to make a success, to prime the pump, so to speak. Of course, the public market is extremely important. Cooperation has been done very easily. It's all done digitally. It's all. Was this the territory side, the local aspect, very important to you? No. Well, when you talk about territory, what do I mean? Territory, country, there are reservoirs of ingenious behavior and generosity, which is quite wonderful, but you have to make sure that the public authorities are on board. If you look at just at a Paris scale, that's great, but it has to be there for the wider audience. We see sometimes we've got the United States have the GAFA, we've got the FERFA. This succession of regulatory obligations which apply at normal times, but we're not in normal times. We're not living through normal times. And all energy is inhibited because of these, and I think we have to find answers to that. Now, I suppose that there would be some kind of control exercised by public authorities, even more so in a time of crisis, surely, than in normal times. And of course, there are constraints linked to the crisis which demand that we go more quickly. But of course, things have to be controlled and managed upstream, like Nantes Entraide in that project, mutual aid project. There were all kinds of risks inherent. So we have to have people working together freely, giving off their time. How did you manage that? I have a good example. At a point in time, we had people who contacted us, said they needed to eat. So we needed people to go and do the shopping, go and get their medicine and bring it to them. So we said, okay, how are we going to do this? We are a public body. We are guarantors of this. So how can we make sure that this works out financially? We cannot guarantee this kind of thing. So what did we do when we said, well, you know, we had to trust these people. We couldn't guarantee it in any other way. We had to trust them. And when the people came back, I said to them, I hope that everything went well, and that you were paid for your endeavor. But what's striking about this period of lockdown is really, perhaps we could have looked at things from a risk perspective. We didn't. We had to trust people. We had to trust people if we wanted people to eat and have their food. That was the fab lab of lockdown, yes? Well, when it comes to risk, we know that the more risks you take, the more attention, the more you're careful, really, in a very overall sense of the term. You have to act waiting to know. You have to act without knowing. And I think what we heard there was that you had the challenge of what's happened during lockdown when we were all exploring unfamiliar territory. This is something that I am taking out of this crisis. I'm taking with me. And it's not about old powers getting back to work, etc., or being put back in place. No, it's really a take-home message. I think there's something else that's important. I think we have to stop basing the rules based on abuse. When we create something, the first thing we should think about is when we talk about how people are going to abuse them, how they're going to misuse this. You know why? Because most people just don't care. They want to look at a project and use it to a better end. And I think the more you trust people, the better people become. We had a connected jukebox which allowed people to have a playlist in one given space. Now, when we shared this project abroad, it was fine. But the first question we got in France was, how can you be sure that the people that are going to use this music are in the right place? Well, you know, people aren't going to parachute music into a place where they're not going to hear it, are they? That doesn't even make sense. So, it's always the same thing. In France, we create laws, we establish laws where we're going to be be interested by the most mediocre percentage of society who could, of course, abuse and misuse a certain amount of technology rather than getting interested in how we could do some wonderful things together. And therein lies the rub. And this is linked to the way in which we look at the relationship with our citizens as well. You've got citizens who are expectant of justice from public powers, and as such, we are almost like suppliers of public service, which for me destroys the relationship of creating a sense to our society. Thank you. I think trust was really at the heart of this episode of crisis. In Nantes, I don't think you can really legislate or decree trust. It's created, it's co-built. However, what's interesting and what we saw was this accelerator for cooperation. Partnerships, we're working together, we're always tapping each other on the back. When cooperation, you get more involved, and you're working on one project, and that demands a certain amount of trust. Trust is there, it's present because we have no choice, quite simply. I call that an episode. It's structural. For the last 30 years, we've been working within Europe, and we've been through several crises, whether this be economics, health-based or social. We've got no choice anymore, ladies and gentlemen. We have to build our future through cooperation and solidarity and mutual aid, obviously combining that with activities which understand the more anxious sides of life, like dealing with raw materials and carbon neutral societies, etc. But all of that has to be put together and whetted to whet the appetite of the generation coming behind us who have this desire to change the world. When we talk about a social contract, what do we want to do together? Let's set the heart of this social charter as having trust in the people around us. Let's share the common challenges and rise to them. It's interesting what you're saying. It's interesting to see from whence we have come with regards to these innovative ecosystems. Not long ago, we had a cluster, and all the territories in Europe were really motivated by this. You had to group together, and I mean physically, the different stakeholders of one particular branch, industrial players, academics, etc. These were, we called them clusters. We've kind of got rid of that now because we realized what we were doing was just financing that which existed. We've gone semantically towards this more floating idea of an ecosystem, which means there's an exit and entry of energy. It's based on the entrepreneurial spirit and an attitude which is far greater than just having actors in one place. It's not particularly sufficient to understand what we're doing today, but it gives you an idea of how we're thinking about we can have a common accord in ecosystems, how we can you have to activate a core, if you like, to engender trust. So when you talk about having this engendered area, you have to have a local common area. And this area is going to link all of the other areas together to encompass all players. And in the work that we're doing at the moment, which I'm afraid is a little academic, there are two policies, which experience-based policies is one of them, and community-based policies. And they are going to come together around one particular project. And I think social gridding is important here as well to see where people are coming from. People from the digital canteen and people from Ecosoli, for example, would have to get together. And that's the kind of approach we're taking just now, having a different, more communicative approach. This is the kind of experience that's going to engender trust and indeed feed into the flows of the future. Giovanni, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to react to this. Do you think it's possible to have this kind of project at a larger level, at a European level, or do you think this type of project is necessarily very local because of the social gridding?
I think that there has been an experience that can help us maybe to focus on an aspect which is the reduction of the barrier, to lower the barrier that there are in developing innovation. And recently, in the last 2 months during the lockdown, the Ministry of Modernization of Portugal has been doing a participatory process among all the civil servants of the ministry to try to get the maximum possible of ideas for debureaucratization, and so to value what was happening around and had still bureaucratic barrier to block the innovation. And I think that this process could be expanded beyond the civil servant to society, for example, for understanding what kind of incentives will be the best that the institution can offer to citizens in order to be more committed in being part of the solution. I was looking with interest to the French Convention sur le citoyen sur l'environnement that during the lockdown did a very interesting document of solution, a contribution from the citizen to the possible solution for the next normal. Next phase. And I think that in this moment we need this strategic thinking in order to lower the barrier and increase the drivers that can help us to change our way of production and also our way of living the relation with nature, which is one of the things that have been discussed a lot during the lockdown. But then as soon as it finished, we try to get back to where we were, and we still have a lot of opportunities to develop for a new type of relation with the neighbors, with the neighborhoods, and with the nature.
Thank you, Giovanni, for that information from a European perspective. Now that is going to bring our roundtable to an end. Thank you all for participating in the debate. Thank you.